Welcome, everyone. We're here with some really hard-hitting intel, information, actions, solutions from the most recent World Beyond War, No War Conference 2021. And World Beyond War has done 4 or 5 previous conferences, 2 in the United States, 1 in Ireland, and 1 in Canada. And this most recent one was supposed to take place in person in Toronto. The timing for this was to time with a Canadian arms trade conference, which the attendees would learn about and would also do activist actions against it. But instead, it was transferred to an online series. And so let me just introduce my colleague, Greta Zaro from World Beyond War. She is an organizing director. And Greta has a background in issue-based community organizing. Her experience includes volunteer recruitment, engagement, event organizing, coalition building, legislative and media outreach, and public speaking. She graduated as a valedictorian from St. Michael's College with a bachelor's degree in sociology and anthropology. She previously worked as a New York organizer for the leading nonprofit Food and Water Watch. So Greta, as an organizer, can you kind of explain some background for why this conference was based and cited in Canada, and what were the goals and aims for this, and how did that then get transferred online when the event that was going to be protested didn't happen in person?
Yeah, thank you, Laurie, and welcome everyone. I'm going to share my screen, and I'll just start by giving a little bit of background about World Beyond War, and then I can transition to talking about the conference and answer the questions that you just asked, Laurie. So let me share my screen. Let's see. There we go. So yeah, as Laurie said, I'm the organizing director with World Beyond War. And World Beyond War, if you're not familiar with it, our mission is to abolish the institution of war. We are a decentralized network. We have people in 192 countries worldwide that have signed our Declaration of Peace, pledging to work non-violently for the end to all war. And we were founded because we felt that there was a need for an organization that is truly global and that has this mission of abolishing the entire institution of war. And we look at war holistically in all of its multifaceted impacts. At this point, we have 18 chapters in 8 countries worldwide, and we also have 89 affiliates. Affiliates are existing organizations that partner with us. And we are really run by volunteers around the world. We have a very small staff, 7 part-time staff, myself included, but we are really mostly run by volunteers and our monthly sustainers who give as little as $5 a month to support our work. This is the Declaration of Peace. I mentioned that people from 192 countries worldwide have signed it. And if you're just hearing about World Beyond War today, I encourage you to go to our website, worldbeyondwar.org, and sign our Declaration of Peace to pledge to work non-violently for the abolition of the institution of war. And so our work falls into these 2 buckets. You can think of it this way, of education and action. First, educating about the problems of war, debunking what we call the myths of war, and then putting that knowledge into practice through our direct action organizing campaigns to make change at the community level, such as divesting our cities from weapons manufacturers. So if you go to our website, again, it's worldbeyondwar.org, you'll see that we lay out these 3 categories to make the case for war abolition. Number 1 is those myths that I mentioned, to debunk the myths that war is inevitable, necessary, beneficial, or just. Then we talk about what we call the 7 whys. why war threatens the environment, why war is immoral, why war erodes civil liberties, why war promotes bigotry, etc., etc. And we have web pages and fact sheets that match up with all of these things. And again, that gets at the multifaceted, holistic aspect that's really key to our work to talk about how war is a social issue and an environmental issue and an economic issue, etc. And then we talk about the how, and that is the AGSS, which is the Alternative Global Security System. This is the basis of our book and all of our educational materials to talk about how we can actually get to the world beyond war that we want to see. And we lay that out in three main strategies of demilitarizing security, managing conflict non-violently, and creating a culture of peace. As I mentioned, we have these two buckets of education and action. The education, this is a screenshot on the left here of the cover of the latest edition of our book. And then off of that, we have lots of other educational materials, such as a study guide that accompanies the book, our online courses, our fact sheets, our webinar series, etc. And then on the action side, our two main areas of focus are weapons divestment and closing military bases. Although I should say that we focus on a lot of other campaigns beyond this, it also really depends, of course, on what is locally relevant to you and supporting activists on the ground in their communities. So campaigns can look differently in each area, but we focus primarily on the divestment and the closing military bases. After a strategic planning process, we felt that these two campaigns were central to our mission of abolishing war and were crucial first steps to first take the money out of war, to take the profiteering out of war by divesting ourselves, our institutions like universities, and our cities and state pension funds from weapons manufacturers. And then to close military bases, we also see as a crucial step to shut down the infrastructure, these 800 US foreign military bases around the world that are propping up US imperialism and empire building around the world. So again, if you're new to World Beyond War, I encourage you to go to our website and to look at all of the resources that we offer. I've touched on just a few of them. My work as the organizing director is to provide support for volunteers in their communities to start up World Beyond War chapters like Laurie is doing, and to provide resources and training so that they can organize events and campaigns in their communities. Obviously, throughout the pandemic, a lot of this work has been virtual, as we'll talk about with the conference. And so a lot of our work these days has been supporting activists to organize webinars on Zoom and other types of online organizing strategies. So yeah, transitioning to talk a little bit more about our conference, as we'll be highlighting today and sharing some report backs. So as Laurie mentioned, our conference was originally planned to be in Ottawa, Canada, in May 2020. And again, as Laurie mentioned, that was because we were timing it with CANSAC, which is North America's largest weapons expo. It's this huge weapons expo that attracts thousands of people from 55 different countries to purchase weapons. It's really a gross representation of the institution of war. And so we had teamed up with Canadian allies to bring our annual conference to Ottawa, to bring an international audience to Canada, to shed a light on CANSAC. Canadians have been protesting CANSAC for decades, and so we wanted to bring the World Beyond War membership there and really shine an international light on CANSAC, and again, talking about CANSAC as well as a representation of the larger institution of war. Then the pandemic hit, and CANSAC, thankfully, was canceled, both in 2020 and in 2021. So that was a victory. And so we shifted to doing our conference virtually instead, and it just happened June 4 through 6. And the theme, we broadened it we called it From Weapons Fairs to War Zones, Unraveling the War Machine. So taking that initial focus on CANSAC, but then widening the focus as we went virtual to talking about the whole spectrum of the war machine, from the mining of the minerals to produce weapons, to the weapons expos, to the foreign policy decisions that perpetuate war, all the way to hearing firsthand experience of people who had been in active war zones. And so we broadened that theme of the conference and of course opened it up to an entirely international audience through the virtual platform. This graphic shows all of the countries of the people who were involved. There were 33 countries, 445 registrants, and 50 speakers. So we were really excited. As I said at the beginning, World Beyond War has always been focused on the need to build a global movement for war abolition. And so through the virtual conference, we felt like we were really able to create that space for international networking and sharing strategies of what's worked in different areas and how we can learn from those success stories. This is just a screenshot of Hopin, which is the platform that we used for the conference, which was a really interesting platform that allowed a more interactive conference experience to try to simulate an in-person conference experience. So there's the main stage where we had the panel presentations. There's also the sessions where we can have breakout groups and discussions and workshops. And there's a networking feature, which is really cool, where you could network one-on-one with people. It was a bit like a chat roulette where you would be paired up randomly with someone else who was attending the conference. And then there's also the expo booths, which is usually a big part of our conferences for all of the sponsoring organizations to have their booths with their materials. And so we did that virtually through Hopin so people could visit the booths and talk to the sponsoring organizations and learn about their work. So the conference was 3 days. There was a lot of content. All of it is available now for free online. You can go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/worldbeyondwar, and all of the recordings have been made public. So we had a number of different panels, as well as discussion groups, workshops, and trainings, again, with the theme of looking at the entire spectrum of war, starting with talking about the mining of minerals, all the way to hearing from veterans' firsthand experiences of war in Afghanistan, as well as hearing from people in Yemen and the impact there, the firsthand experience of being bombed. And then we also ended the conference on a positive note, talking about economic conversion and the need to convert our economy to a peace-based economy and what that can look like, including the importance of having a just transition for arms industry workers. It was also important for us in this conference to have both a mix of education and the panel presentations to hear from our knowledgeable speakers, but then also to make space for the participants to have dialogue amongst themselves. When we organize our conferences, we constantly hear from people that they want more time for networking and sharing, and that deep dialogue with other participants is so important. So we had a whole time blocked off for discussion groups. The list is on the right here. You can read some of the discussion groups that we had on a variety of topics. And these were very open-ended spaces where people could share about their experience related to these topics. This is my last slide, and then I'll turn it back to you, Laurie. This is the list of the workshops and trainings that we did. Again, wanting to balance the information with also action ideas and strategies for how we can put these actions into practice and make a change on these issues. So balancing out the panel presentations with workshops and trainings to hear from people who had firsthand experience of divesting their cities from weapons, of shutting down weapons expos in their communities, of shutting down military bases in their communities, and then some trainings as well about how to use the media and digital storytelling. We also had a training on nonviolent direct action and how to organize an action, as well as a corporate research training of how to look into a corporation to do some research into its investments, and then how you can organize actions around that to put pressure on a corporation to change its practices. So yeah, again, we felt that it was important to balance the content and to have these skills trainings as well, so that people left feeling like they could take action on these issues. And so, yeah, I think that's all for me for now. And Laurie, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Well, I thought we could, since I was a participant in selecting some of these topics to go to, that we could do a little bit of a deep dive in specific topics. So I thought we'd pick up this militarism and mining. So, so there's a race on for mining minerals, and there's a statistics that's very concerning, where the DoD uses 750 million tons of minerals in its weapons production, and it's so I don't know what time period that is. So there's a definite link between weapons production and this mining sector. And during the sessions, it made the link that the mining industry is actually a very brutal, very oppressive industry, that there's a little bit of unholy alliance between the mining industries and the respective militaries in the countries that come down very hard and very oppressively of the people in the area. So, so what I thought we would, mining sites are like war zones, murders, abductions, imprisonment of those resisting the mining companies are common corporate practice, and the military works closely with mining companies to put down protests. So I think not exactly with the conference, but World Beyond War did host a screening of a film called Soldiers Without Guns. And I thought I'd bring that into this talk, because in this very short video clip, it just shows the whole picture of what this of what happens. An island off of Papua New Guinea, Bougainville, was passed around as a colony to multiple interests until Australia got a hold of it and decided that it wanted to place the world's largest copper mine right in the middle of Bougainville. And the resistance to the mine, to the treatment of the people, led into a 10-year civil war. And this was only ended after many failed attempts by a group of soldiers that came in without guns. So I thought I would just queue up for you my screen share and show just a really quick 1.5 minutes.
Bougainville was a paradise.
Land is our heartbeat.
Fire.
This gentleman going to be a guerrilla style of warfare here shortly.
It was a bloody war.
Bougainville is an island to the east of Papua New Guinea. Horrors have occurred there. 20,000 people killed. It is an apocalyptic story of a ravaged people.
Guns brought a lot of pain.
We had slaughtered one another.
We didn't trust each other.
Panguna mine was the catalyst for the Civil War.
Outsiders were needed to come and broker peace.
The Maori concert group and a good shipment of guitars are going to be the main weapons in our arsenal.
Who, as a commander, would say we're taking guitars and not rifles?
Fair to say, felt a little bit naked.
Don't give up.
It was women who were willing to talk.
I was conscious that we could fail any hour of the day.
Yeah, so I thought, that little visual kind of would sum up what this whole sector is about. And this one bright light where David Swanson, the head of World Beyond War, said this little peacekeeping group without guns was the only only military service that he would, honor for their service. So, okay, so World Beyond War last year had a protest outside of NATO, outside of NATO meetings honoring the 70th year of NATO. And being part of World Beyond War came to really start to question this military alliance. And one figure really sums that up. So we know that the United States military spending is 36% of the global spending among militaries. Well, the total amount for the countries who are in NATO is 60%. And what has happened is there's been a type of, and this was described, a type of trying to start a new Cold War with Russia. Well, Russia's military spending is 3.6%. So what that means is this is a very unbalanced, restart to the Cold War. So what happened was that when the Soviet Union fell, the negotiating parties, Bush Sr. and Baker, they promised to Russia that they would not absorb the countries of Eastern Europe into NATO, but that's exactly what has happened. And as part of that, they've done really nonstop war games right on the border in the countries. And there's a sighting of bases, but even missile sites, cruise missile sites, nuclear tipped sites in countries on the border, such as, Poland and Romania. So part of one of the sessions, what it described was of kind of a regime change operation that happened in the Ukraine. And with that, the US had involvement in the unseating of a democratically elected prime minister and leading to coming into power of some neo-Nazi elements within the Ukraine. And they were actually doing ethnic cleansing violence against Russians in Ukraine. In 2014, it was outlawed to speak Russian. And one of these, in these Nazi attacks, 1,500 people were killed. And so basically, what all this points to is what a hair trigger we're on, and particularly with the nuclear issue. There's 1,300 nuclear weapons, and just in one instant, in less than 10, 15, 20 minutes, 10 million people could die with a nuclear launch. So again, one of the things World Beyond War does is has all of these webinars, screen showings, video showings. Another one that I wanted to queue up here that makes the point very, very graphically is when, there's been multiple times when accidents, hair triggers have very narrowly been averted, and total catastrophe and nuclear war has been averted. So here I'd like to queue up another screen share for a powerful film that World Beyond War showcased, which is called The Man Who Saved the World. So this is about a Soviet Union soldier put in charge of a nuclear facility monitoring incoming missiles from the United States. And a false alert happened where they were actually considering, do they need to retaliate? And it was one man's decision. So let me just go ahead and do screen share again.
Most of you might remember when the Cold War was at its height, the Soviet Union had just shot down a Korean jet.
We live in a world in which the great powers have poised and aimed at each other nuclear weapons that can in a matter of minutes arrive in each other's country and destroy virtually the civilized world we live in.
Пошла ракета, повторяю, пошла баллистическая ракета. Военная база западной побережья США. Время старта 00:15:03. Уровень достоверности максимальный. Всем немедленно занять свои места. Права достоверность запуска. Возможно, 50/50.
It's up to him to tell his leadership to launch a counterattack, which probably would have wiped out half of our population.
Нельзя больше ждать, мы теряем время. Мы не успеем ответить, ты должен принять решение.
Если я принял неправильное решение, погибнет очень много людей. Очень много людей.
What a privilege to meet you, the man who saved the world.
I'm not a hero. I was just in the right place at the right time.
Okay. Okay, so that was a little bit connected, and to cue up also one of the talks that Greta mentioned was about space, and I think the title of it was called, oops, here we go again. I have to exit out of that.
It's okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Close the window with the video.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, sorry. Learning these technologies. Yeah, so there was a workshop that was held that was called Star Wars, 21st Century Missile Defense. And so this kind of described really troubling and really disturbing developments, which we've known or heard about in the headlines. And specifically, it was regarding the mass launch of satellites. And this is very closely linked to the DoD, where you have tens of thousands of satellites being launched with ICT, information communication technology capabilities. But there was a description in the talk regarding that these were actually being linked with each other for this kind of total world dominance, that would exponentially increase the advantage of the U.S. military industrial complex, and that at the same time as creating all kinds of space debris, potential space debris. So Yeah, so what's troubling and linking it back to that video clip we just saw is that Russia has a policy of that they will only launch nuclear weapons after first strike, while the United States did not renounce the first strike option. So there's there's kind of like a progressive encroachment or encirclement or provocation, you might call it, surrounding Russia. And I mentioned already the war games, but we have U.S. Navy ships offshore from and probably nuclear capable off of Russia. One name was the main Aegis is encroaching on Russia with missiles. The question was asked, what would the U.S. do if this was happening, off of the U.S. shores? So yeah, there's these capabilities are equipped with Tomahawk cruise missiles. And so this is called a Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. So anyway, this is one of the things that I find so pivotal or timely is through World Beyond War. You learn about this news that behind the scenes and how to analyze these, data 2-minute news clips and put the analysis together. So Greta.
Yeah, and related to that, so the session that Laurie was talking about Star Wars was organized by the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. And that was one of the many organizations. There were 100 endorsing and sponsoring organizations. So that's something else to highlight, that the conference was not just a World Beyond War conference, but it was so important for us to be able to bring in other organizations as well that can share their expertise. And so especially the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, that is, their expertise to talk about space and the militarization of space. So that's the panel that Laurie was talking about. And I see some comments in the chat about China, and there was a presentation from Jody Evans as part of the conference. Jody Evans is a co-founder of Code Pink, and she led a discussion about their campaign, the China is Not Our Enemy campaign, talking about, again, kind of reducing these escalating tensions that we're seeing around the world, and humanizing the other. I think there's this tendency we've been seeing in the mainstream media to create this enemy or the other of China and of Russia especially, and so that was, I think, part of the conference as well, is to humanize people and have speakers from these other countries and to talk about our shared humanity, our shared planet, and how we can build on that collective humanity and de-escalate these tensions, and talking about the efficacy of nonviolence. Some of you may be familiar with Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan, who are two researchers who have done extensive research showing that nonviolence is actually twice as successful to violence in terms of resolving conflicts and in civil disobedience campaigns. And so that's another point to raise in all of this, is that nonviolence is actually more effective. I also saw some comments in the chat about messaging and language, and I think that's such an important point to highlight as well. I think the comment was about kind of having positive messaging, pro-peace messaging versus negative, anti-messaging or resist messaging. And I think that's such an important point. We hear from a lot of people. And if you go on our website or if you attended the conference, you might have seen that we try to combine both the language of talking about what we do need to resist and being clearly anti-war in our messaging, but then also having that positive aspect to talk about the culture of peace that is the third strategy of World Beyond War's alternative global security system. And just as important as demilitarizing is also that creating a culture of peace aspect. So I'm glad that someone brought that up in the chat to talk about the importance of the way that we message. Laurie, did you have a comment?
In terms of solutions, one of the things I wanted to feature was a panel that was on creating departments of peace. And we know in the United States, we had Congressman Dennis Kucinich propose a Department of Peace. Based in Canada, this was a very Canada-centric conference or event. So the Canadians talked among themselves about their progress in their battle to have a Department of Peace, and the need to assess peace, have an agency with funding to assess peace and conflicts around the world in order to respond rapidly and to extend, non-violent methods, and the need to train and certify peace building workers. Now, Canada only has an ambassador for peace and security, but that position has no power. In contrast, New Zealand has a disarmament strategy from the Ministry of Disarmament. So that's something to look at and look into. There's a movement right now, the Costa Rica ambassador to the UN, and we know that Costa Rica abolished its military to promote a UN resolution for countries to establish departments of peace. And for the moment, the countries that have done that are ones who have come out of recent civil conflicts, such as Nepal, that has peace and reconciliation. 2018, Ethiopia created a Ministry of Peace to address the ongoing conflict with Eritrea. Afghanistan as well. Its Ministry of Peace is focused on negotiating with the Taliban, and other places in South Pacific, New Guinea, Solomon Islands. So one of the things is to, focus on the takeaways for where to seize or to leverage for those positive solutions.
Absolutely, Laurie. And I just wanted to flag that the chat is now open again. So if you want to put any questions or comments in the chat, please feel free to do that, whether it's about any of the themes that we've been discussing today or about World Beyond War more generally. Please put those in the chat.
This is like an afterthought, but all the time I was sitting in that peace department thing, it's like they talked about the funding, where it would come from. But for the actual nuts and bolts of what that training would be, look no further than World Beyond War's own manual called a Global Security System, an Alternative to War. So that manual has totally detailed and outlined, suggestions for what could be the training within a Department of Peace.
Great, thanks. I see a comment. What is the Kellogg-Briand Agreement? So the Kellogg-Briand Pact was from 1928, and it was an agreement among the countries of the world to abolish war, actually, to outlaw war. Most people don't realize that this pact exists, and it's actually still on the books, even though many countries are obviously waging war around the world, but we actually still have this law on the books that outlaws war. And there's a really great book by David Swanson, who's one of the co-founders of World Beyond War. I can put the link in the chat, and he talks all about the Kellogg-Briand Pact and how we could potentially leverage this existing law that's on the books and how we can leverage that to end the institution of war. I'll just keep going through some of these questions. I see another question coming in about how to join or start a local group of World Beyond War. So yeah, that's a great question. As the organizing director, that's my job every day, to be working with volunteers around the world to help start up chapters. So if you're interested, please do get in touch with us. I can put my email in the chat. It's my name, Greta, Greta, at worldbeyondwar.org. We have an organizing training that we've developed, which goes through, what our mission is, what our campaigns are, what a chapter is, and then kind of introduces you to different concepts of grassroots organizing. So that would be a first step to take our training. It's completely free and online and self-paced, so you can do it on your own time and then start a chapter in your area. And our chapters work on a variety of things. Laurie, you might want to share some of what you've done too.
Okay.
But yeah, the chapters focus, some of them focus on our education work and using our book and our study guide to host discussion groups in their communities to get a dialogue going about these issues and to debunk the myths of war. And then other chapters beyond education work on different action campaigns. I touched on some of those briefly in the beginning in terms of divestment and closing military bases. But then also, as I said, chapters work on a variety of things related to what resonates most in their community. And so that's a big part of community organizing, is to speak to the stakeholders in the area and to figure out what is resonating most and what the issues are. And so actually that's a really good segue, Laurie, if you want to talk about the Reject Raytheon campaign, which is a local campaign in Laurie's area.
Right. Well, so one of the trainings that took place at the event was called corporate research. And yesterday we heard from one of the organizers with CELDEF, Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, who finds a way of how to counter corporate raiders and corporate harm. So this training was on corporate research. So the military industrial complex has corporate offices manufacturing all over this country. And Massachusetts preceded the Asheville effort in countering a Raytheon plant there and trying to counter out, Massachusetts' war against the rest of the world. So here in Asheville, we were subjected to learning that a massive $1 million plant for Pratt Whitney engines, 20% used for military use, was cited here. 14 months of negotiations had happened, and it was just landed on the public at the last minute with a public hearing conference one day, conveniently after the elections. So the group here, many groups of peace organizers jumped into action, did the public comments, but now they have an ongoing coalition of resistance. And part of that questioning was like, how did this happen? And you trace back that there was an economic development department. It went to Paris to an aerospace industry meeting and recruited Pratt Whitney to come. And so it was from Raleigh, our state house, that they cited an aerospace military industrial complex in a valley that is known for its beauty, its tourism, its pure water, and it's right on the banks of the French Broad, an ancient water source. And Pratt Whitney is known to, when they leave a Superfund site. So this Reject Raytheon, so this is where, the training of how to do corporate research, to counter them and to resist them. I can recommend, when you go to the World Beyond Worlds War website, all of the presentations for these conferences are available there as resources. So I thought we could go a little bit more into the divestment campaign aspect as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk more about our divestment campaign. As I mentioned, it's one of our core campaigns because when we're, looking to abolish the institution of war, one of the first steps needs to be to take the profiteering out of war, to take the funding out of war. And so divestment, we feel, is something that is very tangible and very actionable. It's something that we can do on a personal level, looking at where we bank and where we invest our money. And then scaling up from there, looking at it at the institutional level, your employer, your school, your place of worship, any institutions that you're involved with, looking at where do they bank and where do they put their endowments and investments, and scaling up from there, looking at the municipal level, city funds, pension funds, state level, etc. And I think, so for me, divestment gets me, very excited because it is something we can do, without Congress, without the president. It is something that is doable on the community level. And I think it combines those two aspects that we talked about of the positive and negative messaging, in the sense that we are divesting from something, but then that second piece is so important of reinvestment and tying in messaging about how are we going to reinvest this money to benefit people and the planet. And so we were very excited. In 2019, we were able to successfully run a campaign in Charlottesville, Virginia, to divest the city funds from both fossil fuels and weapons. And that campaign was very intentionally connecting those two issues to talk about the fact that they're very linked, and that war is, one of the greatest contributors to climate chaos. The US military alone is the #1 institutional consumer of oil on the planet. And so, yeah, the campaign combined fossil fuel and weapons divestment. We've been working with other activists since then in various cities across the US and around the world to follow suit and to divest their cities as well.
Yeah, so David did do a little bit of a training at the conference on how to wade in, how to get your feet wet. And he had these series of questions that might help to shape people's thinking. It's like, what has the institution got invested? How can we change it? Who are the decision makers? How do you influence them? Have they divested in the past, and for what? Can you tease out any biases? Who are your opponents going to be for a divestment campaign, and in timing? So in Charlottesville, they connected very strongly the connection between the fossil fuel use and weapons as being inseparable. So,
okay, well, we have about 5 minutes left, so we're happy to take more questions and comments. I've seen a few questions about bioweapons programs. It's not something that we've worked on with World Beyond War, so I don't have much to comment on that front, unfortunately. But there may be other organizations working on that. I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's a question about what do we do to engage with children? I think that's a great question. We do not have as many materials that are focused on school-age children. There are other organizations that specialize on that age group, although I think we do have a few materials that could be translatable. But yeah, I would recommend especially the Global Campaign for Peace Education. They would be a really good resource to look up materials for children. And one of the resources I did want to highlight that we didn't mention yet is our Peace Almanac, which is part of that third strategy in the AGSS, the creating a culture of peace. And the Peace Almanac is a calendar that we've developed. It has an entry for each day, and it highlights different key moments in the peace movement, success stories, or various stories that we'd like to highlight in the peace movement. And it's basically an attempt to shift us away from celebrating militaristic holidays and instead shift our culture. So that would be one great resource I would recommend for anyone of any age to get a copy of the calendar, which is available on our website, worldbeyondwar.org, for free. And you can also buy it if you want a paper copy. Okay, I see another question about, do we have a newsletter and when is our next conference? We do have a newsletter. It comes out every other Monday. And again, you can subscribe by going to our website and sign up for our email list. At the same time, you can sign the Peace Pledge that we mentioned earlier. And when is our next conference? Stay tuned for that. We have not announced the dates yet for No War 2022. Right now, we're collecting feedback from the conference participants of No War 2021 and kind of evaluating what to do next. And it's possible, I think we'll be shifting probably to a hybrid style event with some in-person events as well as some virtual events, because there are definitely advantages to both. As I said, because we were able to go virtual this year through through the Hop-In platform, we certainly were able to reach a much larger and more diverse audience. So, so that's what we're initially thinking is some kind of hybrid event, but we don't have the details yet.
Well, if I could just jump in as somebody who, when I've attended the World Beyond War, they have these 8-week courses, war in the environment, war abolishment. I am just in awe, and I am just an inspiration. It is just really in the visionary space and articulating the peace activists, specialists, experts that weigh in to shape these materials and courses. The webinars are just so, so informative that you really get to see the big picture around this very big issue of this war, this conversion of $446 billion into very unproductive and also really aggressive and militaristic, colonialist, imperialist, whatever you want to call it, to have this much advanced positioning and the 800, 931 bases. The materials generated by World Beyond War are just so articulate, and they really have a thought leadership, both in terms of the analysis and in terms of action strategies. Okay, well, we're at the end of our time and end of our hour. So we really enjoyed sharing this work with everyone here, and do reach out with any, as you're interested to find out more. So Noelle, I think with that, we will sign off. Thank you, Greta.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. It was great to talk with you all.
Thank you. Laurie. Greta, it's nice to meet you. And I guess you're in Asheville also.
No, I'm actually in New York State. I get to work remotely with volunteers around the world from my home in New York.
Oh, darn. I thought we'd have some coffee together with Laurie.
Virtual
Thank you
coffee.
so much. This has been such a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And I do hope that everyone will go to their website. It is chock full of positive actions you can take, resources. We all need to be re-educated about the significance of how our dollars are being spent and what they're doing on this planet. We want the planet to have a future. So also want to invite people later tonight. We're having a showing of The World is My Country, 8 o'clock, return here at 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. Eastern. And Friday, we're having Daniel Ellsberg as a guest. So Daniel Ellsberg of the Pentagon Papers, who just turned 90 and is still sharp as a tack and bringing the goods. And also has some recommendations. He loves the work that you all are doing. We do too. And thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful hour. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Bob and Noelle.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ladies.